Against all the odds, Elizabeth came to the throne in November 1558. And everybody expected she would immediately have her mother reburied, because Anne had been laid to rest in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula inside the tower, described as the final resting place of traitors. 3 queens of England, by the way, are buried here. It's where I got married a few years ago, but not exactly a fitting resting place for a beloved mother, a Queen of England, you would think. I should say that every 19th of May, the anniversary of Anne's death, red roses are delivered to the tower with the instructions that they be laid to the memorial to Anne at the high altar of the church. And that has happened every year since 1850. It's an anonymous bequest, and I can tell you, even though I'm chief curator at the tower, I don't know who sends them. Well, Elizabeth decided not to have Anne reburied, and she took the advice of her counsellors about this, who warned effectively, as they put it, when it came to Anne Boleyn, she was a sore overskinned. In other words, don't pick at the scab. Anne is still a controversial character. If you have her reburied, you'll literally be digging up the past. But Elizabeth didn't agree with all of their advice, because actually she made some pretty clear indications of how she felt towards her mother from the very beginning of her reign. She was presented, when she became queen, with this family tree that she likely commissioned herself. It proved her descent all the way back to the 9th century Dukes of Normandy. And this is the last page that you see here, a detail of it, of the family tree, with Elizabeth's parents. At the top, Henry, the most excellent and victorious Prince Henry VIII. And in the bottom circle, the most gracious Princess Lady Anne, the first wife to King Henry VIII. That's interesting, isn't it? Catherine of Aragon apparently never existed. This is a bit of Tudor airbrushing, ladies and gentlemen. Elizabeth went further still at her coronation, which she closely modelled on that of her mother, even using the same set designers, the same crown. She dressed the same as her mother. And I love the fact that she ordered a life-size model of her mother along the processional route. Elizabeth, though, as a general rule, it was a case of actions speaking louder than words when it came to her mother. And as queen, when choosing her court, it was all Boleyn, really. It was almost impossible to get a job at Elizabeth's court unless you were related in some way to her mother. On the left there was a gentleman called Henry Carey. He was the son of Mary Carey, better known as Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister, and he was highly favoured throughout the reign, as were the other Careys. In the centre, Charles Howard, again a close advisor to Elizabeth, and I've already mentioned the Howards and the Boleyns are close blood relatives. The gentleman on the right has a familiar name, Henry Norris. We know the elder Henry Norris. He was one of the 5 men executed for adultery with Anne, and the only one of the 5 to speak out for her defence from the scaffold. And Elizabeth made it very clear that's why she honoured his son and namesake, Henry Norris. And really, the Norrises were high in her favour throughout the reign. The same was true of Elizabeth's private domain, where really women reigned supreme. Again, it was stuffed full of Boleyns. In the centre there, Catherine Carey, Mary Boleyn's daughter, and possibly Henry VIII's daughter. I mentioned he had an affair with Mary, and the date of Catherine's birth would about work for him to have been the father, so she might have been actually Elizabeth's half-sister. Her daughter Lettice was also favoured at the court, as was her niece, Catherine Carey, shown there on the right, who really became Elizabeth's closest friend. As she grew into her role as queen, so Elizabeth became ever more her mother's daughter. And as such, she loved to flirt. She loved to play the game of courtly love, but she knew it was a dangerous game, that it had effectively led to her mother's death. So she kept the boundaries much stricter, even with her closest favourite shown here, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. I do believe Elizabeth really was the Virgin Queen, and I do believe Anne Boleyn was the main reason for that. As Queen, Elizabeth inherited some of her father's palaces, and they still bore the occasional trace of her mother, even though Henry had ordered all of them, all of the emblems, the initials to be removed after Anne's fall. There had been some that had been missed by the royal carpenters, including the intertwined H&A in the Great Hall at Hampton Court. And some of you may have seen this beautiful falcon in the news a few years ago. So Henry VIII, we know, ordered 150 carved falcons to decorate Hampton Court. I mentioned the falcon was Anne Boleyn's most famous emblem. Now, they were all taken down, those that they could reach, after Anne's fall, but not this. Well, this one was as well, but this one turned up at auction. It was suddenly discovered. Don't know where it had been all those years, but it was bought for £75 and lovingly restored. And the antiques dealer who bought it told us about it at Hampton Court. We did analysis on it and matched it to the description in the building accounts. And we can be sure that this falcon was made to decorate Hampton Court, one of the 150 that I mentioned. And by the way, it's now worth £250,000. As Elizabeth's reign progressed, so into the 1570s, when she'd been queen for 20 or so years, she became more confident in expressing her devotion to her late mother, displaying Anne's emblems everywhere. On her musical instruments, you see a set of virginals there, which are now in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Anne's books, which were decorated with falcons, and the Anne Boleyn cup there, that gold cup on the right, which Elizabeth inherited and cherished. But by far the most poignant of Elizabeth's possessions relating to her mother, I think, was the checkers ring. This was a locket ring made in the 1570s that opened to reveal two portraits. Now, there is some debate as to whether the portrait at the top is Anne Boleyn. For my money, it absolutely is. The face shape is the same, the French hood. The only reason for doubt has been because the hair appears fair. But recent analysis has shown that when examined under a microscope, there are actually flecks of black enamel that likely wore off over the years. The other portrait, of course, is Elizabeth. So when closed, mother and daughter would have touched face to face. And it's typical of the sort of private way that Elizabeth mostly liked to cherish her mother's memory. On the face of it, it was just an ordinary ring with an ER in diamonds on the face. Only she would have known what was within. And one of the greatest thrills of my career was getting to hold the checkers ring, as you see there on the right. Now, I can tell you, Anne and Elizabeth were not boasting when they talked of their long, slender fingers, because I couldn't even fit that ring on my little finger. And believe me, I tried. Elizabeth's courtiers followed suit in this displaying of Anne Boleyn's emblems. You can see on the left there some table linen made for a banquet attended by Elizabeth at the Royal Exchange in London, which showed embroidered portraits of the Queen and, see below, her mother's falcon emblem. Also, another of Anne's emblems, which you start to see from this time, is the armillary sphere. It's sort of a spherical chart of the solar system. And can you see it's on the sleeve there of Sir Henry Lee, who is shown on the right of the screen? Well, it also became fashionable to commission portraits of the Queen's late mother. And most of the portraits that we have of Anne from the Tudor period actually date from Elizabeth's reign.